Welcome, Infidels. Today we're going to take a look at the Babylonians. Here are the readings for this section. From the Bible, I want you to read the book of Daniel, Isaiah 14:12 through 17. From the book of the Ancient World, I want you to read the section on the Babylonians. For teachers, here are 2 links I want you to take a look at. If you read over them and decide you want your child to see them, you certainly can do that, but I didn't require it when I taught my little infidels, so it's up to you. Okay. Babylon lasts from around 1800 to 539 BC. It's known as the land of the 2 rivers, and it gets that from the Tigris and Euphrates that run through it. Another name for it is the Fertile Crescent, or the Cradle of Civilization. Most of the empire was in ancient Iraq. The ancient Jews were captives of Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. And Babylon is important to understanding who Allah really is, because we first see him mentioned here. Okay, just to orient you guys to ancient Babylon, you can see this is their empire. Most of it runs through modern-day Iraq, which is through here. And this is Kuwait. Here's Saudi Arabia. Egypt's over here. Israel and Jordan are here. And up through here is Turkey. Okay? A little bit about the architecture and culture. Most people have heard the term ziggurats before. These were basically step-shaped pyramids, similar to what the Aztecs built. The Hanging Gardens, these were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and they were basically a bunch of plant life and gardens put on top of a ziggurat. We're going to see a picture of that in just a minute. Cuneiform was their form of writing, means wedge-shaped. And the Phoenicians would later take this and develop an alphabet from it. They had magnificent statuary. One of their favorite things to make a statue of was a sphinx. And it was a creature that had a lion's body with wings and a men's head. Okay? This is an example of cuneiform. It's from a British museum. This is a ziggurat, unknown photographer, but as you can see, the ziggurat is in Iraq because look at all the U.S. troops here. Here is an artist's imagination at work, painting what they think the Hanging Gardens may have looked like. As you can tell, it's this ziggurat temple looking thing with all this beautiful plant life put on top of it. And here's an example of the sphinxes that were very common around Babylon. Just a little bit about the major kings and events that happened during the Babylonian Empire. Hammurabi was the first king. He was known as the lawgiver, and he came to power around 1800 BC. From around 1800 BC to 1600, 1595, they had a period where they had pretty steady independence. Then around 1595, they get partially taken over by other empires, the Assyrians, Hittites, etc. They partially rule Babylon. In 612, they finally get their independence back under King Nebuchadnezzar. He unites Babylon, and he takes Israel captive in 586 BC. He was also the king that built the Hanging Gardens and the Ishtar Gate, and I'll show you a picture of the Ishtar Gate in just a minute. Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon as a major force. He lost his kingdom shortly after seeing a mysterious handwriting on the wall. Daniel, a Hebrew prophet, interpreted the writing, and the next day Babylon fell to Cyrus of Persia. Okay? And you can see, read about that in the book of Daniel. As a side note, Saddam Hussein was obsessed with Nebuchadnezzar because he was one of only 2 rulers to ever capture Israel. Well, 2 Arab rulers, that is. The other was Saladin during the Crusades. And this is a picture from inside one of his palaces. You can see Saddam's here and Nebuchadnezzar's here. And his whole vision was that he was going to bring Iraq back to the greatness that it was under King Nebuchadnezzar. He was going to bring the power of Babylon back, so to speak. All right, now we're going to get to Allah, okay, and where he comes from. So we hear that Allah is mentioned in the Epic of Atrahasis. The Epic of Atrahasis is a Babylonian flood and creation story. And there is debate as to whether this or the Epic of Gilgamesh came first. The Epic of Gilgamesh is another Babylonian flood story. I'm not going to cover it in this lecture, but if you are interested, do check it out because it is pretty cool. So like I said, the Epic of Atrahasis is a creation and flood story. It's likely that the author was from the Arabian Peninsula due to it being written in Akkadian. In ancient Arabia, they were worshipping the sun and Ishtar, or Venus, or the morning star. Okay? And Akkadian was a language that was commonly spoken in the Arabian Peninsula around the time that Babylon was coming to power. So the epic is fairly large, and there are a lot of different versions of it. So I'm going to read the parts that are important and then paraphrase the rest for you. Okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and read this. When the gods were man, they did forced labor. They bore drudgery. Great indeed was the drudgery of the gods. The forced labor was heavy, the misery too much. The 7 great Anuna gods were burdening the Igi gods with forced labor. The gods were digging watercourses, canals they opened the life of the land, springs they opened from depths, wells they established. They heaped up the mountains. Years of drudgery, the vast marsh. They counted years of drudgery and 40 years, too much. Forced labor they bore night and day. They were complaining, denouncing, muttering down in the ditch. And this is just a reminder of what they were supposedly doing and where they were digging. Okay, so they were supposedly digging these 2 rivers and heaping up these mountains here. Okay? Then Allah made his voice heard and spoke to the gods his brothers. Come, let us carry Enlil, counselor of the gods, the warrior from his dwelling. Now cry battle. Let us mix fight with battle. The gods listened to his speech, set fire to their tools, put aside their spades for fire, their loads, and marched to Enlil's home. So in other words, Allah instituted the rebellion. The epic concludes with Enlil demanding to know who instituted the rebellion. At that point, Allah is found out, and it's unclear what happens to him from there. Some versions have him being punished, and some versions, nothing happens. After this, Nintu, the womb goddess, makes human beings to do the work for the gods. Okay? The side effect is that human beings, they populate extensively, the earth becomes too noisy, which bothers the gods. A flood is sent, and only a man named Atrahasis, meaning exceedingly wise, survives because he is warned by Enlil. He takes 2 of every animal on board a large ship and waits out the storm in this way. After the storm's over and the floodwaters go down, Atrahasis is taken into heaven. So he was the breed of human that was immortal and impervious to disease. Human beings are created again, but this time they're less fertile. So you'll have women who cannot have children and virgins consecrated to the gods. Also, children will die when they are young to keep the earth from being overpopulated. So this epic helps explain why children die and why some women can't have children. So this is just a review and a summary of the epic. And it's also interesting to note that a similar rebellion from the Judeo-Christian tradition is mentioned. art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, and cut down to the ground, which didst cast lots upon the nations. Yet thou saidst in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven and exalt my throne above and beside the stars of God. I will also sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the height of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High. But thou shalt be brought down to the grave, to the side of the pit. If you're not familiar with the creation story from the Judeo-Christian tradition or the flood story, you can go ahead and check these chapters out, but most people do know it, even people who are not particularly religious. So, the difference between the Judeo-Christian tradition and the Epic of Tracius is that in the Epic of Tracius we get a nice beginning, middle, and end. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, we don't get that. We get bits and pieces scattered throughout the Old and New Testament, okay? And just little clues here and there as to what the entity Lucifer is, and how his rebellion happened, and how his fall preceded that. But we can still compare and contrast. And when you put the pieces together, it's kind of chilling. So in the Epic of Tracius, we have a creation story by a main god, whose name is Enlil. Lands created first, then humans. The fall of Lucifer, the Judeo-Christian tradition. Creation by a major god, or Yahweh. Land and animals created first, then man. In the Epic, there is a rebellion by a minor god, or Allah, before man's creation. Some of the minor gods join the rebellion. Over here, rebellion by an angel, Lucifer, before man's creation. Some of the angels join Lucifer's rebellion. In the Epic, flood destroys man except Tracius and animals. In the Bible, the flood destroys most of man except for Noah, his family, and animals. Okay. I'm just going to let you think upon that slide for a minute, and I'm going to move on to the evolution of religion in Babylon. Okay? So you got to remember the Epic of Tracius is very old, and as time goes on, the gods that are venerated at the time the epic was written, they kind of evolve. Okay? And we're going to see that. So around the time that Nebuchadnezzar is ruling, Marduk, who comes from Enlil, is the main god that's worshipped in Babylon. He's associated with Jupiter, water, and dragons. Ishtar, she kind of comes from the womb goddess. She's a goddess of love, fertility, and war. Venus is her symbol. And she is associated with Arabian gods and goddesses, which we'll see later. Adad is a weather god. Bulls were associated with him, and he's kind of like a Babylonian Thor. Some texts name him as the son of Enlil, who was in the Epic of Tracius. There's also a heavy emphasis on stars, sun, moon, and astrology in the Babylonian religion. Okay, so the Ishtar Gate was a processional gate that led to Marduk, the main god at the time of Nebuchadnezzar. It's called the Ishtar Gate because it was built in honor of the goddess Ishtar, but all the gods are actually represented on the gate, all their symbols here, okay? So I basically just said this. Portions of the original gate are in museums all over the world. The largest portion remains in Iraq, and there's a huge replica of it in the British Museum. This is Marduk. He's often pictured as a winged god with dragons, or even dragon's wings himself. Adad was Enlil's third son, and he has a bull that's associated with him. And this is the goddess Ishtar. She was associated with lions, violence, and fertility. Okay. And after Babylon enjoys this great period under Nebuchadnezzar, it does eventually fall to Persia. Okay? The next lecture is going to be on Persia. So in conclusion, Babylonians heavily influenced modern law and writing. Babylon is where we first see Allah. He was a violent god. Ishtar has similarities to him also. There are parallels between the rebellion of Lucifer in the Bible and Allah's rebellion in the Babylonian epic of Atrahasis. Nebuchadnezzar was the great king of Babylon who took the Hebrews hostage. In the book of Daniel chronicles captivity for the Hebrews and Persia's victory over Babylon. Here are my sources. They can be a little small, so if you have trouble reading them, just let me know. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and you'll join me for my next one on Persia. Have a great day, Infidels.